Okay, well, also Diego's my son. And we're going to start this story when I registered him for kindergarten, and the women behind the table asked me to say what he was. And the choices were African American, Hispanic, Native American. And I explained that Diego was born in the highlands of Guatemala to indigenous people with whom we still have a relationship. They didn't speak Spanish. They speak a language called Tzutzujil. And I didn't see any of the boxes on their paper that fit Diego, and if they felt like they had to check something, then they should figure out what to check. And I'm just telling you this story so that you'll know we're a family that thinks about this stuff and talks about this stuff.
Okay. August 28th, 2010 was my 12th birthday, and we were at a friend's house celebrating. I got a really bad headache, so I said we wanted to leave. And we left, and when we got home, I had such a bad headache that we ended up going to the ER. And there in the triage unit, when they took my blood pressure, I remember the nurse saying, "This can't be right, let's take it again." And they changed monitors, cuff sizes, and even nurses to try and get a different reading, but my blood pressure was still high and rising, so they ended up putting me in a treatment room.
So now it's about midnight, and Diego, they've done a bunch of tests on him. They haven't found anything. The headache is gone, and we're thinking, okay, let's call it a night. He's now 12, and let's go home. But the attending doctor said that we couldn't leave until he heard back from the kidney specialist on call, because high blood pressure can be a sign of kidney disease, and they wanted to rule that out. We waited and waited, and about 3 in the morning, the attending told us that he had heard back from this kidney doctor, and the kidney doctor said that Diego not just should be admitted to the hospital, but should go to ICU immediately. So he was admitted to a room upstairs, and they administered a blood pressure lowering med through an IV, and a nurse sat by his side all night long and watched so that his blood pressure would come down slowly at just the right amount of coming down. Did I forget something?
What? Oh, yeah. Well, I was in the hospital for 4 days or something.
Yeah.
But when I got out, I had diagnosis of stage 3 chronic kidney disease. And that meant that I only have about 25% kidney function. And there are 5 stages in kidney failure. And when you reach stage 5, you have to be put on dialysis or get a kidney transplant. And they couldn't determine when I would reach stage 5.
So the next few months were horrible, as you can imagine. We got his blood drawn every month or so, and we watched his kidney function decrease. And he gave up playing hockey that winter and soccer that spring. He just didn't have the energy to be the athlete that he had been. And by January 2012, so a year and a half after the diagnosis, he did reach stage 5, and they told us he'd have to go on dialysis. But before they could put him on dialysis, they had to do a pretty major surgery and implant a port right next to his heart. When he woke up from the surgery, he had 2 tubes sticking out of his chest, like 4-inch tubes. And they brought him to the dialysis machine right away, and they would take the blood out of one tube and run it through the machine that actually looked a little bit like a washing machine, and clean his blood, and then run it back into his body through the other tube. And the process took about 4 hours, and he had to do it 3 times a week for the indefinite future.
So after about 6 weeks of being on dialysis, my port was still fairly new. And I was horsing around my friend's house just like the old days when I felt something tear in my chest. So I told my mom, and we went to the ER and we got stuck with this cranky nurse who acted like I was her problem instead of her job, and she didn't want to be there, but neither did I. After about 3 hours, I really needed to pee, but she said oh yeah, I forgot this part. So I got hooked up to a bunch of IVs, and I was like mad and stuff. And then I didn't understand, and then they had a slow dripping antibiotic to prevent infection. Okay, now I can continue. After 3 hours, I really had to pee, and the nurse said that I needed to take the IV pole with me, which pissed me off more than it should, no pun intended. And so I started unclipping myself from the IV, and that's when the nurse screamed at me, and I screamed back and looked her dead in the eye and said, "If you come near me, I will hurt you." And so she lunged at me, and that's when I kicked her. And she flew back against the wall and knocked stuff off the table. And at that point, I was just crying a lot. And I was like, "You're a bitch. I'm going to kill you. I wanted more." And my dad was holding me down, and I was just crying into his arms. And I remember saying, "I don't want to die tonight, Dad."
So then they had called security, and the security guards came in. Fortunately, Diego had been at the hospital so much, he knew them and was friends with them, and they knew he was cool, and they reassured him, and he calmed down a little bit. But when we left in the middle of the night, after the antibiotic had finished, there was a Minneapolis police officer outside the room, and he said that the nurse was pressing assault charges against Diego, and we'd have to go to court. You know, this night is out of control, right? I don't know what to do. It's gone from horrible to more horrible. And everybody I told the story to in the next few days couldn't believe it. Nobody could believe it. Because she was a pediatric nurse. She must have had experience dealing with kids who were sad and angry and upset. And Diego had been completely out of line, but she was the grown-up. And it just didn't make sense to me. But we had to do something. And I used what you could call my privilege or whatever you want to call it. And I called an old friend in the county attorney's office. And he put me in touch with a lawyer in the juvenile division, a guy named Paul Jung, who listened to the story, and he couldn't believe it either. And he said, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of him. He's not going to get into that much trouble. You'll see. Everything will be all right." So about 2 months after that, we had our court date, and we showed up to the juvenile detention center, downtown Minneapolis. And we walked into this big waiting room that was full of mostly black and brown teenagers who seemed to know what to do. We had papers to fill out. I filled out the one asking for a public defender, and I gave Diego the other one.
I was supposed to check a box saying what race I was, and I honestly think human is the right answer, and Tutuhio would follow close behind. So on the paper I wrote human, comma, duh, exclamation point, and got in the line for the, and when we reached the clerk, I slid him the paper, and he said, "Smart aleck, huh?" and slid it back to me, and that's when I lost it again. I crumpled up the paper and said, "Fuck you," and threw it at him while he asked if I wanted security called on me. I responded with "fuck you" in both middle fingers. And that's when 2 armed Hennepin County deputies had to drag me from the room.
Yeah. So, as we walked to the bus stop, I was thinking, a little tiny bit of me was kind of proud of him, but most of me was thinking, "You little shit. You have no idea how much trouble you just bought yourself." It took me a few days to find Paul Jung again. And when I told him the story, he actually cracked up. And he again said not to worry, that we'd get a notice of another court date in the mail. And we did. And so 6 weeks later, there we are back in court. This time, we bypassed the waiting room. And the public defender met us outside the courtroom. And she took Diego away to a conference room for a minute. And when she came back, she explained that the deal would be that he would plead guilty to assault, but that if he didn't get in trouble for 90 days, he wouldn't have a juvenile record. She said it was a good deal, and she was impressed by how good a deal it was. We should take it. And so I signed the paper.
So in the courtroom, Paul Jung told such a sympathetic story about what I had gone through, what I was still going through, that my mom cried. I don't remember that. But after that, he walked down with me, and he said that he liked my Marine Corps shirt that I was wearing, which said "In memory of our fallen brothers," and told me about his time served overseas in Vietnam. And Paul Jung, to me, is a hero, not just because he had more sympathy for me than a nurse, or because he wanted me to get out of that bad situation, not just because he served. He's my hero because he knew what it was like to be afraid of dying. And that's how I felt that night in the hospital. I'm telling you this story because I want you to know that when you have a chronic illness, it will beat you up physically. But what people don't understand is how much it takes out of you mentally. And I know that's not really an excuse for what I did, but that's one of the reasons why I lost control.
And finally, you should know that just about 2 years ago, Diego did get a new kidney. And as you can see, he's doing great.
I also got cancer.
Yeah, well, it's another story.
Thank you.